It is Monday, December 30th. We're right at the end of the year here, which is sweet. Got a topic for today. It is from Reddit. It's going to be about meetings, which everyone loves meetings, right? So we'll chat through that. I'll give some different perspectives on that. As usual, if you want stuff answered, just add it to the comments. I'm happy to go through that. Otherwise, I go to Reddit for ideas. Why is that visor down? And then, of course, if you want stuff answered more privately, just message DevLeader on social media. That's my main handle. It's my main YouTube channel. And then a reminder as well that on Mondays at 7 p.m. Pacific on that main channel, DevLeader, I do a live stream very much about topics like this, but because it's a live stream, you can chat with me and I'll answer any questions you want. Well, within reason, of course. But yeah, check that out if you like this kind of stuff. So with that said, meetings. So on Reddit, kind of a typical, I guess you call it like typical kind of complaint or frustration with software development and meetings. Like kind of like, how much time are you guys wasting on meetings, right? Because I think I don't think a surprise to anyone that meetings feel like extremely ineffective. Will depend on your role, of course, but I think that it's not unusual for people to have that kind of stance on meetings. For me, like as an engineering manager, it's a little bit unique because a lot of my work is meeting with people. But there's different types of meetings, and I think that's what's worth kind of talking through today. I did a quick scan of the comments to see like just different directions that people were taking this conversation, like when they're thinking about meetings, like what are the things that their teams are doing. I didn't see anything that was like, I don't know, unexpected, I guess. I think anything that I was kind of seeing was like, okay, we have stand-ups, we have retrospectives, we have different sync meetings, we have like one-on-one type meetings, like a whole bunch of different. Oh man, that's not a turning lane. What are you doing? Oh, interesting. It's a very, very early signal. Good job. Yes, keep turning. So I figured it would be good to look at some of these, some different angles on them when I think they can be effective, when I've seen them become extremely ineffective, and maybe some things we can do. Because I'm just blabbing as I drive here. I don't have like a checklist in front of me to go through all of them. So I'll try to touch on as many as I can with different examples, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, so I think maybe one that's pretty obvious to start off with is like a stand-up meeting. And I know that when people hear about this kind of stuff, like we have retrospectives, we have stand-ups and stuff, like a lot of this is anchored in like agile software development. And it's been kind of interesting over the last, like, I don't know, I feel like over the last 5 years in particular, there's been like this huge push against agile software development. And I think, I don't know, I feel like people love to complain about stuff. Like agile doesn't work, it's this part of the system, and we just want to build stuff. And I think the reality is, like, I don't disagree that there are really terrible implementations of agile that aren't actually agile. People just slapped a label on them. So I get that frustration. But like, I think some of the core parts about agile are literally like to not have the processes, right? So if you have processes over people, then you're already not doing agile properly. So like, it's not agile, and I think that's a bad implementation of it, and people should be having conversations about that. But anyway, I digress. For stand-ups, I think that this is rooted primarily from like agile software development, or flavors of agile. And again, I'm going to talk through these. So the concept is supposed to be that it's a very brief meeting between team members, traditionally like a stand-up, so that like you're not sitting down and relaxing and lounging around, you're standing up. It's kind of like almost like a forcing function to keep you to try and talk and speak about things in a succinct way. And really, it's a quick update, and the goal is to figure out if people are blocked on things, right? So if you're doing a stand-up meeting and even if you have a small team and people are going like into the weeds about implementation details and like all of these things, that's like already not an effective way to leverage a stand-up. I don't have like off the top of my head, you know, like what the time should be given a team size. But honestly, I feel like being able to go like 30 seconds to a minute per person is like probably all you really need. And if you had a team of 5 people, having a meeting that was 5 to 10 minutes long is already giving you some buffer, in my opinion. Like that's how I see how stand-ups should be able to go, right? The reality is that in practice, this almost never happens. Almost never. And I think a couple causes, right? Like one is that as technical individuals, people like going into detail. I think another thing is that people genuinely, and this isn't like a knock on anyone, but people genuinely don't understand the purpose of the stand-up. I think for newer developers, I don't blame them, because the other part that I want to call out is that someone should be trying to moderate this and keep it on track, right? If you're doing a stand-up meeting and these things are going on for 30 minutes and you only have a couple of people, like that's probably not an effective stand-up. Now, caveat here is that depending on what you're doing in that meeting, so I'm saying that might not be an effective stand-up, but your team actually might find that valuable and you're having good conversations. Like, hey, like we actually did need to schedule some time to talk about this because it is complicated and we do have to get on the same page. So it's not that it's bad, it's just like that's not really an effective stand-up. So this gets more complicated when you add more people into the mix, because there's a lot more overhead now, right? So let's say you had 10 people on a team and 2 people really needed to sit down and talk about something complicated, get on the same page about something. So if they were leveraging that stand-up time and doing a deep dive on these things and took 20 minutes of the time, you're wasting the time of 8 other people, right? And this happens, like stand-ups, I think many places happen daily. It's like a daily stand-up meeting. That's why it's quick. And if this kind of thing happens on a regular basis, it's no surprise to me that people absolutely hate this. They're like, why do we even do this? It's such a waste of time. Okay? And so one of the things that came up on Reddit, specifically around stand-ups, were people were chewing out project managers. And when I kind of talk through this, I want to talk about project and product managers. They are different roles. People will define them different ways between different companies, but just for the point of this conversation, when I talk about project managers, this is more about coordinating, keeping things unblocked, looking at dependencies, especially between teams and things like that. So a lot more coordinating. And product managers, from my experience, are a lot more focused on what customers are asking for, what features we should be building and prioritizing. Okay, folks, let me in. So, what people were saying in the Reddit thread was like, it feels like, again, I get the sentiment, but I think they're kind of like, I don't know, like kind of taking out their frustration on a group of people. So some of the comments were like, you know, stand-ups are dumb because we have these non-technical stakeholders that show up and just like make us explain things, and like that feels like it's really ineffective. Now, I'm not going to disagree that a stand-up meeting might not be the most effective use of that time, right? So if you have a stand-up meeting and you have 10, I'm going to just use 10 people as an example. This is an easy number to work with. You have 10 people and each one has to go spend extra time explaining things to a non-technical stakeholder, like one at a time, basically, like kind of, people were saying like dumbing it down. I don't really like saying that. Just like translating it to a non-technical stakeholder. Like if that's extra time in that explanation, that might be a complete waste of time for everyone else that's stand-up for one person's benefit. So I understand that kind of frustration that can come from that. But to me, that's not a reason to like say, okay, well, therefore a stand-up meeting's useless. Now, I'm not here to say the other way that you have to do stand-up meetings. Like all of these things are just tools, right? If we understand the goal of a stand-up meeting, is to look for blockers, make sure people can keep moving, people are on track, right? So someone's in their stand-up meeting, they're like, I've been working on this thing for 4 weeks, and someone's like, dude, that should have taken 2 days. Like, you know, a stand-up meeting is to try and help catch stuff like that from happening. So, like, if you're not using it for that purpose and then you're feeling frustrated about it, it's like you just might be using the wrong tool. So in this case, if people are complaining about explaining things to non-technical stakeholders, like, yeah, perhaps a stand-up is not the thing you want for that. So could you experiment with some other way to get the non-technical stakeholders what they need to be unblocked? I'm not going to get into a conversation about whether or not their roles are important or not, because that's, I think, a complete can of worms. Because in some cases, probably not. In some cases, probably very important. Is that a TT up there? We'll have to see if we can get closer. But yeah, I think maybe you have to go look for another mechanism to get people the information they need, and maybe it's not a stand-up. Quick anecdote, I had a team at one point that, pretty small team, so I think 5 or 6 people at the time, kind of fluctuated between like 4 to 6. I don't think we got more than 7. And we were working in the office, so, you know, just call that out for whatever bias that might add. But so we were co-located in the office, and we were communicating so actively all the time that stand-up meetings for us became kind of ridiculous, because it was like what are we doing? Like, we're already talking. Why are we artificially meeting again when we've already been talking about all these things anyway? So what we would generally do is, with our core team of developers, and I was the engineering manager and a developer on the team, it's like a technical manager role, and so like we would skip our stand-up a lot because it didn't matter. Now, going back to these like maybe more non-technical roles, that would mean that if we did have, you know, our product manager wasn't in every single stand-up meeting, and if they needed to drop in and have a conversation, like, we would just kind of tailor that time to make sure exactly what these people on Reddit were complaining about. We would just get on the same page and chat through it. So it meant that it was not every day. So we didn't have that burden of like, oh man, every day we're wasting 30 minutes doing this, but it would be like a few times a week, we'd spend 10, 15 minutes kind of chatting through something. And it wasn't like, I don't know, it did not feel taxing, small team. And like I said, we were just using it to get alignment. But the development side of things, like purely on the engineering aspect, like we were already in sync around the clock, so it didn't really matter for us. So that's one example. Used up a lot of time on stand-ups. Retrospectives, I think, are another one. Again, this comes from like agile software development. I think some people absolutely hate retrospectives, and I think that's because they're not being used effectively. And I have been in retros that feel like a complete waste of time. And so my advice for retrospectives, if people aren't kind of challenging what's going on, like doing a bit of an analysis and reflecting on what's actually happening, sprint over sprint. And again, I'm using the word sprint here. You don't even have to use a sprint. Some interval of time, okay? Just so people don't get, you know, totally triggered by the word sprint. Like, if you're doing a retrospective and reflecting on some period of time, whatever you want to label that, I would say if you're not analyzing and challenging what's going on, you're probably not going to have an effective retrospective. Like, the goal isn't just to say, good work, team, let's do it again. Like, celebrate the things that worked well, try to understand why they worked well, and talk about shit that's not going well. So some of my best retrospectives, like, that I can remember being in, were not comfortable. And we would talk with our small team, and we would talk about the things that we like were kind of driving us nuts. Like, hey, this is really not working well for us. And that could be something within our team. That could be something that we're interfacing with another team on, and we're like, hey, look, like, this working relationship, we got to do something about this because it's impeding our ability to do good work. So we would talk about these things, and it was a safe place. Like it would feel like you could feel the temperature in the room going up. And that's not because we were yelling at each other or like, just like picking on people and shouting. Like, not at all. It was because people cared about what was going on, and they were speaking about these things that they were, for lack of a better word, like passionate about making better. So, in my opinion, if you're not challenging things and trying to come up with how to make things better, it probably is going to feel like a waste of time, because what else are you doing there? I should add, and I kind of hinted at it, but like, I think celebrating things that worked well is important. I don't think having a whole meeting just patting each other on the back is necessarily worth the time, because you don't need a meeting for that. And actually, some people may not appreciate being kind of like celebrated in that way. That's a whole other conversation about recognition patterns and stuff for people. Some people hate being called out in public. Some people really like it. But anyway, I don't think that's like the most effective use of a retro, but I think it's valuable to call out things that are going well. But if you're not taking that time to reflect on things and trying to improve them, I think that's a huge missed opportunity. So that's my take on retrospectives. I'm trying to think if there's anything else really to add, but like in the past, and I guess still to this day, when I talk about how I've historically run teams, I like to think about continuous improvement, and I find retrospectives are a formalized way to try and get that to happen. So you truly don't need a retrospective if you're constantly doing these things or finding ways to have it come up naturally, right? If the team is very vocal and willing to try things out and like have conversations, the person almost merged into me, not very smart. Absolute dummy. Then if you're doing those things regularly, kind of like what I was saying for our stand-up meetings, right? It's a tool. If you're already getting that stuff done, pardon me, I don't know where my voice is going. If you're already getting that stuff done, you may not need a meeting for it at all. But for us, it was just an organized way to do it. So just an example. I would say in more recent times, like some of the teams that I'm running right now, like we don't do retrospectives at all. Why? I think like some of the stuff that my current teams that I don't force process on the team, if that makes sense. So my stance, especially coming into a team, is that I'm not there to go like impose change. If I'm creating the team from the ground up, I will set up some things as a starting point. So for example, if I were creating a team from scratch, I'm the first person on the team before I start bringing people in. I would say, just as a starting point, we're going to have 2-week sprints. We're going to do a retrospective at the end of the sprint. And depending on if we're like on the size of the team and whatnot, we'll have a stand-up or a sync meeting, whatever that needs to look like. But I would start probably with something like that. And we'd go from there. But from day one, I would be telling people on the team, look, the whole point of doing this is so that you have mechanisms to drive change in the team. I'm not going to sit here and tell you what's best, but I will help you try to put these things in place that we feel like as a team will make us better. So I don't feel like it's my place to go commanding the team, like you must have a retro, you must do this. If they're stuck, if I feel like genuinely there's some challenges on the team and things are stuck, then I will start suggesting things and saying, let's try it, to demonstrate to people, hey, look, like if we want to see change, here's how we go about it. But again, digression. So on the retrospective point, I think there's a couple people complaining or suggesting like sprint timelines. I saw someone suggesting 6-week sprints. I know I can say with confidence that if I had one of my teams in the past moving from 2-week sprints to 6-week sprints, that would have been completely useless for us. I think on some teams, like probably right now, based on the pace of delivery and how things roll out, I would say having longer sprints would be beneficial. But that's just because of sort of the nature of how stuff lands on the teams that I'm on now. In previous teams, that would have been terrible. But again, I think these are things you can talk about with your team. So that's sort of a meta point with all of this, by the way. Maybe I haven't been very clear about it, but meetings are tools, right? Like, I think if we understand what the goal of that tool is, or the goal of the meeting, if it's not serving that purpose, we should be talking about it. That's why I was trying to say with the stand-up meeting, like, what's the goal of it? If that's not what's happening, like, let's have a conversation. I don't think it's, if I had people coming to me and saying like, hey, we do this thing and it just doesn't feel good, we would change it. We've literally, like, not even reporting up to me, but even with my own manager, we've had things, over the past few months where people have said, hey, this meeting we have doesn't feel effective anymore. Like, it's really long. We understand what the goal is, but like, that's not really what's happening. And it's been refined and we've cut the time in half. So like, again, understanding what the goal of the tool is and then having a conversation about it. It's not to, like, if we're just venting about things and complaining, then like there's not really a lot of opportunity for improvement. But I think if people there's nothing wrong with like, being frustrated by things, but come with solutions, right? Like, if you're frustrated with, what's being discussed in the meeting, like, okay, do you understand the goal of those things? If so, like, what's your proposal? Right? Like, come with some solutions or suggestions to try, right? I think that can go a really long way. So we talked about sprints a little bit in terms of the length. We talked about retrospectives, at least my opinion on what the goal of them is, how to do them effectively. A quick note, when I talk about that stuff for retros, I don't mean that every retro needs to feel like you're in a heated battle and everyone should be nervous before going in, but I want people to feel empowered that they should be able to talk about things that they want to see improvements in. Like, that's what I want to see come out of that. Otherwise, I don't see a huge benefit in doing the retro if we're not going to reflect on those things. And then we talked about stand-ups. Another quick note on stand-ups is, like, I found with remote teams and going cross geography, doing a daily stand-up would be hell. It would be absolute hell. And that's because I feel like, at least the way that we're set up right now, it would just feel like extremely inefficient. So we end up doing not daily stand-ups, but like almost like a weekly sync, or in some cases like bi-weekly. So again, adjusting the tool, adjusting the cadence for getting the value out of it. And if people started feeling like, hey, twice a week is too much or it's not enough, like, cool, let's have that conversation, right? If you had retrospectives, that's a great, forcing function to get you to talk about these things. Otherwise, just bring it up in general. Like, people should feel comfortable to be able to talk about this stuff. At least that's how I approach managing teams. And then something else, like, I only got a little bit longer on the highway here, but something else that came up on the thread that I think is important is like, people were saying, well, there are these other meetings that are like more ad hoc, right? And I think that that's a valuable thing to call out. Is like, we talk about these like recurring meetings, like stand-ups or retrospectives. By the way, we run live services where I'm employed at Microsoft. So like, we have like a service review as well. So not quite a retrospective, but we'll talk about like live site issues or things that came up from partners, and just like a review of the health of the service. So kind of like almost like a little retrospective, but not so much from like a development life cycle kind of thing, if that makes sense. So that's just another example of like a recurring meeting. But these one-off meetings, I think this is a different kind of angle on things, right? I think a lot of people complain about the recurring meetings because they take up time and they don't see the value in them. And truly, the way they're implemented, there might be very little value, so I'm not dismissing that. But this idea of like one-off meetings, I think are great. So, for example, if we go back to the beginning of this rambling, I was talking about a stand-up meeting where there's 2 engineers that have to get on the same page, right? And there's 10 people, so 8 of them are kind of like wasting time or whatever. Like, that's a good example of like, hey, just go like schedule a quick call between the 2 of you. Or if you're in person, like go jump in a meeting room after. Like, go do that. Don't take the opportunity and like consume other people's time. Just go set up a quick sync between the 2 or 3 of you, whatever it is. Because clearly, like if you're getting into the weeds and discussing something, it probably needs to have a conversation. It's not that the conversation itself is bad. It's that you're using everyone else's time and it's not an effective use of their time. So don't do that. It's the same kind of thing where we have, say you want to do like a review of something. We've seen this with like design reviews, and we want to make sure that everyone on the team understands the design that's going to be implemented, but then you invite a whole team of people, and then you only have like 2 or 3 people that are actually having a conversation about the design, and everyone else is sitting there like, what the hell are we doing here? So, you know, that kind of situation, reduce the audience significantly so you have a very meaningful conversation, and then share out the results of that. And that's the meta point in this section, is like, if you're going to do these one-off conversations and like people really do have to go dive deep on stuff, you don't need to have everyone else with you there necessarily, but it would be helpful if you can share the learnings or the outcomes with the team, right? So, hey, yeah, like in stand-up, me and John took this thing offline. We met up after, and I was talking with John about how we're going to go implement the next phase of this thing, and we arrived at like, you know, solution A is actually going to be better than solution B. Here's a couple of notes, and send it out in an email. Or put it into your Teams or your Slack channel, whatever communication medium you guys use, right? But like, give people the update so it's not like no one gets, you know, an understanding of what's happening. But you don't need to involve everyone when they're not going to actually be involved. So I think that can be awkward for some people. When I kind of said this earlier too, like when you're moderating meetings like stand-ups or anything, it can feel uncomfortable for people to like tell people like, hey, like in a polite way, like, hey, shut up and take this offline. You wouldn't tell people to shut up, of course, but the point is like, you kind of need to interject to say, hey, look, like respectfully, other people are not getting the benefit of this. That does not suggest that what you're talking about is not important. And I think that's confusing for some people, and it makes people feel awkward. Either the person who needs to interject or the person who feels like they're being cut off, right? The point of stopping that kind of conversation is, again, not to say what you're saying is not important. The point is to say, there's a goal of this meeting, there's a particular audience for this meeting, and if you're not sort of in line with that, let's just make sure you have a conversation about this separately, out of respect for everyone else's time on this meeting, right? That has no suggestion about the topic not being valuable. But some people can either take that the wrong way and feel like, oh, like you're cutting me off, that doesn't feel good. I feel like that's less common, but it happens. And then people don't like, and I know this is even awkward for me, right? And I've been doing this for a while, but like it can feel awkward for me to interject, because I'm like, like it's actually, you know, people are having a good conversation, but at some point I have to be like, look, I'm looking around at the meeting and I'm like, there's 10 other people here doing this, kind of looking around, or like they haven't unmuted in, 20 minutes. I'm like, no, like it's clearly not, an effective use of their time. So you got to stay on top of that kind of stuff. So, okay, I'm at work. That's meetings. Meetings aren't going away, but I think we should be having conversations about how to make them more effective. If you don't feel like you have room or space to be able to talk about those things, I would try getting, more in line with your manager. And that's a whole other topic in and of itself. But I personally feel like, I would want people on my team to be able to come to me and talk about that kind of stuff if they didn't feel comfortable just talking to the whole team about it. right? I would love if people were just like, hey team, like, by the way, we do this meeting and like, I'm just wondering if we could make it more effective. Like, hell yeah. But if someone was like, I don't know if I feel comfortable doing that, and they said, hey Nick, like, I've been thinking about this, could we talk about this, or what are your thoughts? Like, I would be more than happy to have a conversation like that, because again, I always talk about my role as an engineering manager is to allow my team to do their best work possible. If there are meetings that have a purpose and they're not fulfilling that purpose or not doing it effectively, I want to enable that to be done effectively. So that's that. We'll have another topic on the way home. So thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.